Hare Krishna. Welcome back to our study of the Yoga Sutras. Today we are going to discuss Sutra number 32, which is a very interesting sutra, both from the practical application and also from the technical aspect of this particular sutra. So let us see what this sutra is. So this is how the sutra goes. Tat pratishedartham ekatatvabhyasaha. So what is Patanjali saying here? Tat. Tat here means, if you remember how we arrived at this point, in the last two sutras, Patanjali spoke about the various obstacles, the 9 different obstacles and the 4 internal states in which they manifest. So we saw the whole list of challenges a yogi faces in their journey of spirituality. And in order to prevent them, so tat refers to those obstacles that were spoken of, pratishedha, for prevention of them, for the sake of artham. What is the process that Patanjali is saying? He's saying ekatattva abhyasaha. Our practice should be on one principle or one technique, right? So this is how the translation goes. To prevent them, that is those obstacles and distractions that we spoke of, one must practice concentration on a single principle or use just one technique. So ekatattva abhyasa is a very important concept that Patanjali is introducing as a practical tip for all the young seekers, right? Now, what is that ekatattva? What is that one principle that I need to follow? Now, if you look at it from the flow of thought that this particular series has had so far in this section of the book, we began with the concept of Ishvara Pranidhana, and we saw about how to relate, realize, and the result of Ishvara Pranidhana. And then we discussed how Ishvara Pranidhana, the goal is how it removes the obstacles, and then we saw the list of those obstacles, and immediately this principle comes. So it is very natural and logical to conclude that, yes, Ishvara Pranidhana is that one principle, right? Of course, it is right. Ishvara Pranidhana is a very, very powerful principle, and that one principle alone can help remove all the obstacles, right? And especially we saw as part of the Ishvara Pranidhana, chanting of the holy names, chanting of pranava is such a powerful process. It can help remove all the obstacles. However, that mood of Ishvara Pranidhana, if you remember, Pranidhana means it's almost like surrender. Surrendering one's ego to the Lord is actually a very advanced process, right? Because surrender, unlike other techniques, it's not an action, but it is more of an internal mood. It's an intention. And this, you can mimic actions, but you cannot change, you cannot force your intentions, right? In that way, surrender can be a very difficult process, because after a lot of purification of the senses, body, mind, intelligence, and the ego, that is when one is ready to this process of Ishvara Pranidhana. So it is actually, in that sense, a very sophisticated and an advanced process. So Patanjali, while presenting this sutra, he also, after the sutra, he is going to list 7 different techniques of what are those one-pointed principles that we can adopt according to our own individual taste, temperament, and our inclinations. We can choose one of those, right? So this is the kind of an inclusive perspective that Patanjali offers, where he's not forcing everyone to just take one process, right? While he establishes the understanding and the importance of Ishvara Pranidhana, at the same time, he doesn't want to make it very imposing, right? And therefore, he is going to give us, in the next 7 sutras, is going to give us 7 different techniques. However, the moment you are given different options, the mind may fall into the trick of a very important problem may come up in the mind. So to understand that problem, I'm going to tell you a very interesting story. So this one time, a person wanted to dig for water. He was trying to dig a well. So he identifies a particular spot. He starts digging. After a lot of effort, he realizes, I am not able to see the water. He becomes very disappointed, because he doesn't know that, just below is the water. He doesn't know that, right? So then he immediately comes out of the pit, starts digging for another pit, and again goes all the way down and realizes, oh no, again, I still don't discover any water. And he keeps doing this again and again and again, right? And in the process, what happens? He keeps fluctuating. He keeps digging so many shallow pits, but all he had to do was just dig one deep pit, right? Now, this is the story of all the young seekers, young practitioners, right? Many times what happens, instead of putting that one pointed effort, we want to keep changing our practice. We want to keep trying that varieties of, today this style of practice, tomorrow another style of practice. Change your practice, change the mantras, even to the point where you change your gurus. Also, people do that, right? So this is actually, you are just falling prey to your chittavrittis again. You are falling prey to the mental fluctuations again. So therefore, Patanjali is warning us that you need to have that ekatattva abhyasaha. Just pick one process and continue doing that. This is very, very important, especially in this age of social media where we are bombarded with so many distractions, even in the spirituality, even the field of spirituality. We see that people don't want to stick to one process, but rather they want to keep hopping processes, just like a monkey is jumping from one branch to another. People keep jumping from one process to another. So Patanjali is warning such practitioners that no, don't keep digging too many shallow wells, but focus in one area and dig for one deep well if you want to achieve the success of reaching that water. So this mindset can be understood with this very interesting distinction between a goal-centric technique and a process-centric approach. Goal-based approach and process-based approach. What is the difference? In a goal-based approach, one is focusing more on the destination. One day, someday in future, I'm going to reach that, right? So the focus is more about what if when I reach that stage. But in a process-centric approach, it is not the destination, but it's the entire journey. One is learning throughout the journey. Every day, every step, every moment you involve in that process is a process of learning and growing, right? In a goal-centric approach, you are repressing your present state for some possible future state. It's a very disturbing state. If one actually goes through this process, you're constantly holding on in the promise of some goal, some bliss someday in future, right? So the very mindset of goal-centric can be very emotionally challenging sometimes. Whereas in the process-centric approach, because every moment is a learning experience, you are experiencing those little incremental growths. The present is also blissful, and even when you reach your destination, you'll be even more blissful, right? And finally, in a goal-centric approach, your motivation is success. And the moment you don't experience success, you become demotivated. And people give up their practices because they don't see the goal. Just like the person earlier, he did not see water. So he gave up that path and jumped to another path. Whereas in a process-centric approach, the goal is not success, but the purification of consciousness, the learnings that we gain from the process, right? Which means every moment, every day, every asana, every book that you read, every breath that you take can be a potential source of learning and experience. So you are being more involved in a process-centric approach. And that is what Patanjali is trying to inspire us when he's talking about this ekatattva abhyasa, or this focus on that one process and stick to that process. Don't worry about the goal. It's not about reaching success. It's not achieving success or reaching some destination, but the journey itself is going to transform you. It's going to give you that learning experience, right? So that is very important aspect. Also, from a technical perspective, actually this sutra is also a critique on the Buddhist philosophy. Now, at the time when Patanjali was presenting his philosophy, the popular opinion was that of the Buddhist philosophy, because Buddhism also talks a lot about meditation and so on, right? And in the classical Buddhism, there are these two important concepts called Kshanikavada and Anatmavada. Anatma means there is no soul. According to the classical Buddhist philosophy, there is no soul. Consciousness is a product of matter. And this Kshanikavada basically explains that what you experience as continuity of experience, because if there is no soul, then who is the observer? A question may come up, right? So according to that philosophy, basically what it says is actually life is just a collection of moments. There is moment after moment after moment, right? Indirectly, it is like a movie reel, for example. If you look in a movie reel, there are so many moments, right? And what you call as an experience is basically collection of these moments. Otherwise, there is nothing called as soul. Even consciousness is a product of matter, right? It denies the existence of soul. However, Patanjali is trying to present a critique on this philosophy. Now, understand, this is a very refined way of presentation. It is not some mudslinging that we are used to seeing in the modern society, but this technique is in the Vedic culture is called as a Purva Paksha, meaning that when you are establishing your theory or your hypothesis, not only are you explaining your theory, but you're also trying to present a critique on other popular opinions, trying to show, see, this is the shortcoming in this theory, and this shortcoming is filled by this understanding. So with that intellectual maturity, things were presented, and it is not some kind of a personal attack or mudslinging which is happening here, right? So what is Patanjali? Why is he presenting this critique? Because according to this philosophy, the popular understanding based on this is, because there is nothing called as soul, it is just the series of events which are happening, the mind will keep projecting different series of thoughts. All you need to do is become a passive observer of these thoughts. Just keep looking at these thoughts, and slowly you will develop detachment, and that is how you will attain the state of nirvana. That is the understanding of meditation in that school of thought. Now, some of you might have heard this concept also, becoming the distant observer or the passive observer. Now, this technique works in developing detachment. When somebody is very emotionally turmoiled by their mental states, sometimes when emotions overwhelm us, it is good to develop a passive state, become an observer of your own thoughts, and thereby it will help you to develop that kind of an emotional detachment. Emotional distancing can be achieved through this technique. However, the downside of this technique is basically, look, what are we doing? We are just observing our thoughts, or in other words, we are just observing our chittavrittis. So the very goal of yoga, chittavritti nirodha, cannot be achieved by this technique. You may achieve some level of detachment from those emotional states, but you will never achieve the perfectional state of chittavritti nirodha. So as a critique to that, Patanjali says, understand the limitation of this anatmavada and kshanikavada, where actually there is an observer. In fact, he also, the Vyasa in his commentary goes into little more details, and he explains that actually the theory that there is no soul is incorrect, because if there are just these impressions on the mind, if everything is on the reel, who is observing the reel? There has to be somebody outside that reel to observe the reel. So who is that observer outside the reel who's carrying these experiences and experiencing that continuity of thought? And that external observer is the soul, right? And of course, there are a lot more technical aspects. We don't want to go into those details. It's not relevant at this stage. But the understanding is that Patanjali is trying to establish the principle that, look, there is a Purusha, an observer who's observing these chittavrittis. And our goal is not to just observe these chittavrittis, but to make these chittavrittis, to absorb the mind. And that absorption means actively focusing on just one thought, right? And that was the alambana, pratyaya alambana, that Patanjali spoke about in the Samadhi section earlier on in this chapter. So the perfection of yoga, of overcoming our chittavrittis, is not by just distancing ourselves from our mind, but rather actively learning to concentrate with that ekatattva abhyasa, with that one pointed principle or one kind of a practice. That is the key lesson that the technical understanding that Patanjali is offering us here, right? So like that. So this is the significance of this particular sutra, right? Where basically this ekatattva abhyasa, by that he's saying that consistency in one path is more important than exploring multiple paths. That is an important lesson that we learned here. Other aspect is why? Because what motivates us to keep changing our paths is lack of success, right? But Patanjali is saying, no, the goal is not that external success in that path, but as you go through the journey of going to that path, we are purifying our consciousness, we are purifying our sense of being. That is more important than the external success. So it's not about how perfectly you are doing that particular asana, but rather how much have you struggled, how much have you learned to come out of your comfort zone in coming to whatever stage you are able to execute that action. So coming out of your comfort zone is more important than getting that perfect Instagram perfect pose, right? Therefore, focus should be on purification and growth rather than just on some external success. And finally, from the technical point of view, Patanjali is saying that active focus on one thought is more effective way of controlling the mind than just passively observing too many thoughts, because you may end up again becoming a victim of chitta vrittis, just observing your chitta vrittis. So these are the 3 key lessons that we learned in the sutra. In the subsequent 7 sutras, we are going to see one by one what are those different techniques that Patanjali is offering us. As Ishwar Pranidhana is definitely a very powerful technique, but for somebody according to their different tastes, temperaments, and their own inclinations, what are the other techniques that one can use to overcome those obstacles and eventually prepare oneself to come to the state of Samadhi? That is to be our theme in the future sessions. Thank you all for joining us today. Hare Krishna.